Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode almost 30 of Rocket Lab Weekly. Sorry for the late start. We had some technical issues. Somebody in the comment was suggesting that SpaceX is sabotaging this podcast because they're trying to stifle competition. It might be some merit to it, guys. Okay, this podcast is getting too big. SpaceX doesn't want the news to go out how great company Rocket Lab is. So today I'm very happy that Tim could make it. So hello, Tim, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Vince, for inviting me again. A lot to discuss, I think.
Exactly. So the stock is at or near all-time lows. I was checking it just before the show. We hit all-time lows with 1 cent. We didn't close on all-time lows. But there was the wick of the candle of the day. It was 347, which is a new all-time low for Rocket Lab. And I want to go over the news that happened this week. And then, of course, because there isn't a single retail stock investor that is up on this investment. So this could be Rocket Lab bag holders weekly. And I know that some of you are scared. Some of you are scared, but are controlling your emotions. Some of you are super confident. Some want to sell. So I want to take a big 10,000 foot view of, like, is this a failed investment or it's just a broken stock and the company is doing good? And I think Tim is the perfect person to discuss it with this week. Cool. So how was your week, Tim? How do you handle the price being this low?
Actually, I had a great week.
Okay.
You see, every time the stock is doing bad, I I put up the slingers behind me. No, 1 week ago was my birthday, and they're still hanging there. But no, I'm honestly I'm fine. Of course, if you look at your portfolio, you see a lot of red, but I tend to just evaluate the business and stick to evaluating the business. And if the business keeps performing better and the stock keeps getting lower, it means that each time you buy, you get a better deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt.
Well said. And you get zero emotions, like because I understand this. Like I have the same belief as you, but I still had like, I don't know. I wouldn't even say that I was scared, but it was like somehow mentally tiring for me to look at the stock, and it was like, oh, it went lower, and yeah.
Yeah, maybe in terms of my account, although I have a significant amount invested, I don't do margin or options or anything. I'm just a simple buy the stock and hold them type of person. So maybe that I also don't have margin or anything. Maybe that is also a factor in there. But each time when one of my stocks goes down, I always try to. Of course, I do try to assess why they're going down. I think that's always useful info. But especially when you see, for example, an entire sector going down, so the space sector as a whole, except for SpaceX, it's significantly valued. If you compare to 2021, it's significantly less the current valuation. So that also gives me an indication, together with, for example, at how much private investors, like the pros, the venture capitals, are evaluating Sierra Space and Relativity and Firefly. They all currently have higher valuations than Rocket Lab has in the public market. So, yeah, I always have a couple of touch points and my discounted cash flow analysis. But of course, each time the stock moves against you, there's always this little voice saying, "Are you making the correct bet?" Of course.
Yeah. Cool. So let's start looking at this week what happened. So I just wanted to start the podcast. Oh, let me see. Maybe I didn't share Okay, so here is the screen. I just wanted to show this. I'm pretty sure that we are getting close to a bottom. And the reason why I'm saying it is, if you technically look at it, this is the RSI indicator, which is the relative strength index. And every time it hit 30, it didn't really go lower. Like here, it hit 30 and then it started going sideways and then up. I went through the history. You see also it like hit the 30 here, and it like here it went a little bit up, but sorry, like a little bit lower, but yeah, it's at this point it doesn't matter. This was the only time when it went super low, and it did come a little bit lower, but then yeah, it still bottomed out. And I think we can all agree that we have had an almost straight fall. Here it was the only upswing from $6 and what is it, 20 cents down to $3.55. We were almost cut in half at this point, and no stock can ever go down in a straight line. So I think that there is going to be at least a temporary bounce back, and then we see if that holds. As for the news, so the first news of the week is that the encapsulation of the 47th mission is ready. This is a mission for NASA, as far as I understand, where they're going to fly 2 satellites on one Electron. And to be honest, it makes me very nervous because the satellites, they change orbit. So like one satellite is going to be deployed in one orbit, and then a kick stage is going to take another satellite to another orbit, which is a very, very complicated maneuver. Like, remember, a lot of companies like Firefly and Relativity, like they have trouble sending one payload up to orbit. And this is like doing it twice in the same thing. So this launch is actually within 4 days. So Tim, what do you think about it? Yeah, what's your view on launches this quarter and this particular launch?
Well, I think this particular launch is interesting, right? Because it's like a mini rideshare on Electron.
Yeah.
But all in all, I'm currently not too much worried about the cadence for the Electron vehicle. I think if they would land somewhere near 20, that would be fine for me, honestly. I just want to see year-on-year increases in launch cadence for Electron, but also keep in mind, you know, if you really look at it from a numbers perspective, of course, every bit helps, but you know, Neutron is the big needle mover together with the space systems business. So I think watching Electron and the launches, and of course we don't want another failed launch. But I'm less focused on it, to be honest, than for space systems and.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was very focused on the launches up to I listened to Adam Spice in one of the conferences where he actually said that it's very, very difficult to predict even quarter to quarter. So he didn't say like week to week or month to month. He said it's very, very difficult even quarter to quarter to predict how many launches you're going to have. And he said that it has never happened, because where I would get worried is if Rocket Lab is delayed with their own production and the customers are waiting. But Adam Spice has said that that has never happened in Rocket Lab's history, that the customer came with their payload and they didn't have an Electron or a rocket ready. And so I believe that whatever delays that we see, it's like weather or the customers are having issues. It's not on Electron. And because I understand how difficult it is to predict this, yeah, I'm also like, if we even 16, 15 launches is, I think, a huge increase compared to last year. And I'm just happy seeing that.
And maybe also taking the long view, each launch that is pushed currently from 2024 will just get added to the backlog. So it's not like it is not really lost revenue. It's just it's a temporary. Yeah, if you are a quarter-to-quarter investor, then it will matter. But
Yeah.
of course, you also don't want all launches move out each year. You want to see them build a cadence, but not everything is lost if launches are moving a quarter or two.
Yeah, exactly. And on this note, there was another tweet by Scotto, who actually has a very good way of tracking the launches. He's actually supposedly more accurate than the NASA Next spaceflight app. And in his latest update, you can see they did 4 launches. He's predicting 4 launches in Q2. And unfortunately, he's saying that NASA pre-fire, which was already bumped, I think from Q2 to Q3, is already bumped further back in time. And we don't have a new date on it. So it looks like we are going to get 4 and 4 launches. And Q3, which in the initial guidance was going to be the least launches, like it looks like that is going to be the busiest quarter of the year.
Yeah, they are launching for Kineas. Am I pronouncing that correctly? I think they're doing a couple of launches for them in June or July, so somewhere in that time.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. Yeah. Yes. Okay, cool. And keep in mind, it's also so interesting that, when it comes to Rocket Lab, everybody always talks about the rocket launches, but 66% of their revenue comes actually from space systems. But it's somehow the rocket launches that is like we see and we get excited about. But their space system side is doing very, very amazing. The news this week was they reached a big milestone, and the first payload module for our constellation of 17 spacecraft for MDA Space and Globalstar has been shipped. It's a $143 million contract. I want to get your take on it first. Yeah, we get your take on it first, and then I want to have some comments on this.
Yeah, I think it's always good news. I think they were, if you look at their original communication compared to their current delivery, I think they're slightly behind, but not really worrying for me. I think it's also good to keep in mind that the revenue recognition model for this is not because this happened out of the quarter. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Q1 will come in lower than expected, because I think for the space projects or programs, they recognize it based on the cost to complete, which basically means as costs are incurred, they recognize revenue. So I don't think it will impact any of the Q1 figures. But overall, it's very positive that they are completing this, because in the end, keep in mind, this is the first time they actually really ship out the Lightning platform, so the Lightning satellite. So that's a very good indicator, because it means that they technically completed the full satellite, and they showed that capability, which I think is is an important milestone to show.
Yeah, it's funny. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And what we also saw is, I think I posted it on my Twitter too, or X, everyone says X nowadays, is that L3 Harris, which is a defense contractor, they actually got in trouble with their satellite bus, but that was not for MDA, but that was for the Space Development AG.
Yeah, SDA.
So for SDA. So, there's a real, I feel there's a real market in, getting an ironclad schedule commitment to the customers and delivering on time, or somewhere in the ballpark.
Yeah.
It's an exciting opportunity, especially for the Lightning platform, since they will also use that for the SDA.
Yeah. I also think that this was a very major milestone, because they were complaining about how the revenue recognition of this contract is set up, and they were doing a lot of research and development. And even though that's like 50% of the work, they couldn't recognize any of the revenue. And then I think that the fact that they shipped out the first one, it means that all the designs, everything is finalized. And I guess NDA is going to, and if everything is working, then they will just mass produce the 17 satellites. And it's going to really increase the space systems revenue, because they can actually recognize the revenue now, even though the bulk of the job, like the research and development, was done in the years prior. So I thought that this was very, very bullish for space systems.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think you also have to keep in mind that that the Lightning platform, I think that's the potentially one of the four out of the four platforms that could be that is, I think, the money maker. So if you look, what is the potential total addressable market for the Lightning platform? That's larger, I think, than currently than for the other platforms. Why? Because satellite communications is the largest market in the space economy.
Yeah, I actually have a tweet here. Let me see, by Dave G, just to show everyone. This is 2023 report that breaks down all the like the small sats that are in space, and 79% of those satellites was in communications, as you also mentioned. So yeah, that is the biggest market. Only 13% is in remote sensing, 7% is in technology development, and 1% is scientific. Cool. Let me see if there was any other Rocket Lab news. So the only other thing that happened with Rocket Lab is our beloved Peter Beck, the one in which we trust. He did a podcast, or he was on an interview with Opto Themes. And I really like this interview. I saw some tweets that you have sent out. What was most standing out for you from this interview?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is I went into this interview with, let's say, like zero expectations, because I already seen some people on X commenting, that nothing, it was just a standard interview and he said nothing interesting, and everything we already heard before. And then I started listening to the interview, and I did came away with some new takeaways, at least for me. Maybe I wasn't paying attention sufficiently. But one of the interesting things which you always have the discussion about Neutron in terms of the payload, is it big enough? And he actually commented on that. I think it was around 14 to 17 minutes. But basically what he said is, like, with Neutron, they are aiming to get to 90% of the market. And they could also build a larger vehicle, for example, like the Terran R. But the reason they didn't do that, because in order to get to that additional 10%, the operating costs of the vehicle would increase multifold. I think he mentioned, like, if I want to close the remaining part of the market, then the operating cost of the vehicle would increase with 20%. Yeah. And I'm no rocket engineer or scientist or anything, but one of the big advantages of Neutron is that it doesn't require a launch tower. And I think all the large vehicles, all the heavy vehicles do require a launch tower.
Yeah.
And I think some people really... I think a lot of people on X, they really understand the engineering side of the rocket. I don't understand a lot about the engineering side of the rocket, I must honestly confess, but I think I do get a good sense about, more the commercial, the business side of things.
Yeah.
And I feel that's really always under highlighted with Neutron, because Neutron isn't the best engineering masterpiece, but it is one of the best commercial rockets, I think.
Yeah, from an efficiency and production viewpoint, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and because I think people don't realize that the way Neutron is being built is with keeping the launch infrastructure to a minimum. And people are always focused. Elon Musk, he always says, "Yeah, Starship is going to cost 2 to 3 million per launch." But at least for Neutron, the bill of materials is only 1/3 of the total cost of launching the vehicle. Actually, the people you have to pay will run the launch infrastructure, the heavy towers. I think Mechazilla cost like 1.5 billion or something for Starship to launch. But Neutron, it's all very, the launch infrastructure by way of design is all kept to a minimum.
Yeah.
So there are some real cost advantages Peter Beck is realizing by developing a medium vehicle and not developing a heavy vehicle. And my theory is he made a very, very, he really thought this through. And I think my hope is, and I'm also betting on that, is that Ashley Vance always says, Peter Beck is 10 steps ahead of the competition, except for SpaceX, but compared to the other space companies. And I think he will prove everyone wrong again.
Yeah, I think so too. And there was a comment here who was saying, wait a minute, how can Neutron get to 90% of the market launching only from Wallops? And I think by what is meant in 90% is that as someone answered also here, that 90% of the satellites that
of the payload,
like they could launch. Obviously, then there is other factors like those satellites need to be launched maybe from Wallops, maybe from other inclination orbits that Wallops cannot get to. Then obviously they can't buy, but 90% of the satellites would fit onto Neutron.
The main point I was trying to make commercially, you can have a lot of increasing payloads, but let's say you can, just out of my head, you can launch 80 to 90% of the payloads, and you can do that at a certain cost.
Yeah.
And the question is, in order to launch the remaining 10 to 20% payloads, are you going to accept 3 times operating costs?
Yeah, and also what people like so well said, and also what people get wrong is if you're launching 17 tons to space, they always go like, yeah, but the Falcon 9 is cheaper per ton, right? But if you're launching the 17 tons and you fit into Neutron and you fit into the Falcon 9, and the Falcon 9 is going to cost you 60 million, but Neutron is going to cost you 45 million, you're going to take Neutron any day, even though it's a higher kilogram per launch, whatever price. And this is why Neutron is going to be so competitive, because it's still fitting. Yeah. So
maybe one thing too, and I think it was something Dave mentioned, not Dave G, but another Dave on X, and he said that he said that basically with the Starlink V2 minis, that once Starship will start to take those payloads, Falcon 9 will have a lot of excess cadence, and that will likely happen in 2026. But Falcon 9 has a significant margin on the vehicle. So I think what SpaceX will do, and what they did in the past, is lower the prices of Falcon 9, also to be competitive on the scale of Rocket Lab. That's nothing to... of course, that will create some increased pressure. But I think Peter Beck already accounted for everything, also for Starship. And that's why he on purpose developed a medium vehicle and not a heavy vehicle. Because I think heavy vehicles, without having a space systems business, which feeds into the heavy vehicle, are going to have a difficult time.
Yeah. And I mean, like, the bigger the vehicle, like the more expensive it is to develop it. And I think to develop a Starship, I think the development cost is around $10 billion where it's at now. And like Rocket Lab currently cannot finance such even something that is like, let's say they do 10x cheaper, it's still $1 billion. We ain't got $1 billion to risk on a heavy launch vehicle to compete with Starship. So I think they're very wise on where they compete and where they put the money.
Look, I think what's going to happen is, we see Starship now running with Cadence, or now not Cadence, but already getting significant flight time. Once it will be end of, let's say within 5 years, that thing will be running. I don't think it will immediately impact Neutron, but slowly but steadily, it will first start to impact the heavy market, I think.
Yeah.
Because it will, within 5-6 years, I think it's very likely to get very price competitive in the heavy launch segment. And so, for example, with Terran-R is, for example, I think going head to head, for example, than with Starship. And then the main promise of Terran-R is saying like the telcos, they don't want to launch on a competitor, but a lot of these companies, they I think we saw it last time, was it Telesat? Yeah, with Telesat. If Starship is like twice as cheap, and I think of Satcom constellation, I think like a very significant amount of the total costs of the constellation is the launch cost. If they could slice that, for example, from 3 to 2 billion by getting on Starship and instead of Terran-R, even while it's a competitive vehicle, they will do that.
Yeah,
and I think Peter Beck, he by competing with SpaceX, he already understood that threat, and that's why I think he also moved to a medium vehicle. Because if you have a medium vehicle, then you have a lot lower cost structure. Then you don't have a launch tower. Then you have a lot of less cost, even though you're then at a lower cadence, because it's very difficult to get to Starships or SpaceX cadence. You will be more cost competitive than a heavy vehicle if Starships start to compete.
Yeah, I think this is my personal thought, that where Rocket Lab is going to shine is actually the like, let's say you take Amazon, who wants their own constellation, the Kuiper constellation, and then Rocket Lab says that, look, we design, we replenish, we do everything. And then I think that when they do that, because then they can somehow incorporate the launch price into the development price of the satellites, and they can guarantee a schedule, they can guarantee a delivery, it's going to work, and it's high quality. And I think that that's a service that SpaceX is not offering. And I think that once Starship reaches because look, the 10 billion in production cost or development cost, they have to amortize. So even if, let's say that the material cost of the Starship is 30 million, and you have some other costs on it, which is 10 million, you still have to amortize $10 billion of development costs to make that ship profitable. Obviously, if you have 10 years to do it and thousands of launches, but it still becomes tens of millions of dollars per launch.
So I can maybe say on record, maybe I will be proven wrong, but I don't think there will be ever a situation where Neutron has a higher cost per vehicle than Starship.
No, maybe. We like, the thing is, again, I think that the difference is going to be that on Starship you can launch 150 tons, and then on Neutron you can launch 17 tons, right? So let's say that you can launch a satellite constellation that is 2,000 satellites all in one go. That is like then the per satellite cost of the launch is still going to be cheaper with with SpaceX, right? But then it requires that you can mass produce 2,000 satellites all in one go and deploy that, which doesn't happen today. And then go ahead.
Oh, so maybe to clarify, I was just talking about responsive launch. So I think a lot of people, there's economic launch, and I think SpaceX will always dominate economic launch. That's the lowest price per kilo. So Rocket Lab, I think, can't even compete in that segment.
Yeah,
I think I was just talking, responsive launch, meaning there's a payload which both Neutron and Starship can launch. And if it's a dedicated payload that both Neutron and Starship can launch, I don't think, based on the cost per vehicle, that Starship could run the payload cheaper than Neutron. That's my prediction. But
yeah, let's see what happens. Cool. Back to this interview that we were looking at. I'm trying to remember if there was anything else that was interesting that came up. I was really missing an update on Neutron. I'm pretty sure that his lawyers, and I have learned that Peter Beck, he really likes to hold his the cards to his chest, and he doesn't like to. I mean, Adam Spice already said that it's going to happen like end of March, beginning of April, and he is looking like a fool because it didn't happen. And I think that Peter doesn't even want to risk this, so he just rather doesn't say anything. But it would really be nice to get an update, like, yeah, it's looking good or something.
he also said in the end, right, and is the way he thinks. I think the interviewer asked him, what type of space application really big, and what he said is that it would be really commercially silly to answer this question.
Yeah, exactly.
So that that shows to me, like he's more like, for example, also with like a capsule announcement or something like that. It won't happen, I think, very shortly, but I can totally imagine that on one day on X, I'm just scrolling, and then all of a sudden Rocket Lab has a news, and that they, for example, have a capsule developed, and they have a capsule customers, and it's going to launch, I don't know, within 1-2 quarters.
Yeah.
That's just how they do business. They don't, they're not going to put out these very bold statements and then hope that they can reach them, and they just execute and then they deliver. That's what they always do.
Yeah. Cool. So now that was all the Rocket Lab news, but on space news we have a very interesting one here, which I think is let's take the news. So sources tell this news organization that Relativity Space has gone out to market to raise $1+ billion in a Series F round, which, if closed, would bring Relativity's total funds raised to a staggering $2.3 billion. To put that in perspective, Rocket Lab's market cap sits at $1.75 billion. And they don't have a successful flight yet. It's nuts to me. And it's not the market cap of the company, it's money in the bank that they have raised. So what is your opinion when you look at how much valuations rocket companies get on the private market and how much capital they're able to raise compared to where Rocket Lab valuation is? And
Well, Relativity is very good at one thing, and that is raising money. I think that's they have proven to, even in difficult circumstances. I'm not sure if they're going to close the 1 billion, but that would be, considering a lot of space companies have really a lot of difficulties in getting funding. Them getting 1 billion of funding shows their investors really have confidence in them, to be honest.
Yeah. I don't understand how would you have confidence in because like I feel that what Adam Spice is saying, that the age of new rocket companies is closing, because I feel that you have to risk so much capital to develop a new rocket, and then you're coming into a very saturated market. And how are you going to earn back this money? Because keep in mind, Relativity is a pure rocket launch company. It's not rocket launch and space systems. And Rocket Lab has a 1.5 billion valuation, being rocket launch and space systems, and 66% is space systems. So if I just keep it simple, the rocket launch business of Rocket Lab is maybe priced at 500 million.
Dave, I see your comment. I will come back to your comment in a second.
Yeah, sorry, it's me who's keeping him up.
No worries, no worries. But with regards to Relativity, I think one of the comments I made, I don't really see the business model yet fully closed.
Yeah.
And of course, I can always, I'm glad to be proven wrong. But one of the things I'm wondering, especially like Dave Huntsman now says, you know, Falcon 9 is going to flood the market potentially in 2026. You know, Relativity, even in their current estimates, they're not even launching at that time. And if you have and that's the point I initially made, by developing a medium vehicle with a significantly lower cost base, of course, it's going to be difficult to compete with Falcon 9. But in Relativity's terms, competing with a Falcon 9 will be even more difficult than Neutron competing with a Falcon 9.
Yeah.
And also the fact that they are going to currently be in the market in 2026. Yeah, that's also at least based on what we currently know, later than Firefly, later than Neutron, probably. Yeah. So I am a bit. For them, I would be a bit worried, because I think the cost of launching the vehicle is higher than Neutron. It's a heavy vehicle. For me, that makes sense. And they discounted, I think, a lot of the first launches. So they're not earning like very big money on potentially their first 4 year of launch. Because first in year one, it's going to launch once. Year 2, 3 times, maybe 5, 6, you know, and then it goes. But I think they already signed more than 10 to 20 launches, and all of which are somewhat discounted. So what I'm just trying to say, if I would be an investor, the return on, I have to wait a very long time to get return on my money with this investment.
Yeah. And now to answer Dave's question, it's actually a really good question. I can read it, and then, so with respect, I don't think Tim answered my take that Falcon 9 flooding the market in 2026 will be the real Neutron competitor, not Starship. From 2026 on, SpaceX can lower Falcon 9 launch cost to 30 million and still profit.
Yeah, I think you're correct, Dave. I don't think, Dave, it's my opinion. I don't think they will reduce the launch cost to 30 million. I do think the first thing, when Neutron will hit cadence, they will meet Neutron's launch price. It wouldn't really surprise me. For me, that's like a 50-50. Why them not lowering to 30? Well, if you look at the payload figures, Falcon 9 is currently bringing in 5 billion. What you're saying now is that they will be willing, even though they have a more reliable high cadence vehicle, that they would be willing to cut their Falcon 9 revenue in half. I don't think they would do that.
Yeah, I also want to add to this that SpaceX as a competitor looks very scary, but if you think about it, like, they already today have a 99% share of the launch market, and the market is still growing. So somehow I feel like people are thinking that SpaceX is going to take away business from Rocket Lab, which might happen to a certain degree, but it's not like, Rocket Lab has 30% of the market and they're afraid that it's going to go down to 15%. It's like SpaceX already today has 99% of the market, and there is a lot of companies and even more government agencies that don't want a space monopoly. And I think that they're going to do everything in their power. Like if you read what the SDA is trying to do with their programs, like they're specifically saying that they don't want concentration in vendors. They want multiple vendors to bid. They want to award contracts to multiple vendors. On top of it, if you look at this tranche 3 lane 1 or 2 that Rocket Lab is trying to maybe get with Neutron for the SDA, they specifically say that they want newer launch companies to come into existence because it's just better for everyone. So I think that Rocket Lab will be able to get a lot of government revenue. I think that they will have different strengths than the Falcon 9, and they will get customers, but I do think that Falcon 9 is still going to have 80% of the market, and it doesn't mean that Rocket Lab is not going to be a good business.
And maybe Dave, to also answer your question, to make it more specific, Neutron is going to launch hopefully once in 2024. Not 100% sure about that, but let's just assume it. It's going to try to launch 2 or 3 times in 2025, 6 times in after that, and then build the cadence. So at first, to build the cadence, for example, just getting the missions from NSSL Phase 3, Lane 1, so that's the National Security Space Launch, if they can get like 10 missions out of the 30, then that's already set them on a nice trajectory. So what I'm saying is,
it's Neutron, like 3 years production gone. Yeah.
Neutron, what it really needs, and that's what Peter Beck is also referring about, he's not going to, because Neutron is going to come into a market which in 2024, 2025 has a sufficient deficiency in launch. Companies will be, itching to get on this ride, but he is going to select the customers. He needs anchor customers. So what he wants to do, what I hope he does, is that he signs Amazon, and that he becomes a big player in the government launch. Because if he has 2 anchor customers, one being Amazon and one being NSL Phase 3, Neutron will be all right.
Yeah, like it will be fully booked for many years to come. Because exactly. also what people have to understand is the difference between the geostationary orbit, which was the previous, like that's how they did satellites in the old time, is that you go up to 36,000 kilometers above Earth, and the satellite is always in the same like as the Earth rotates, the satellite rotates the same. So when you're on Earth, it's like a stationary satellite because it's always in the same space. It's very hard to get to that orbit. There is 0 atmosphere there. So whatever you get up there is going to stay up there for 20, 25 years. And then in today's space economy, like people are after the low Earth orbit, which is like, I don't know the exact number, but it's like between 500 to 800 kilometers from Earth. But then if you send a satellite up there, it covers much less, because, when you're up 36,000 kilometers from Earth, you basically see, like, you need like 3 or 4 satellites to see everything on Earth, But then when you're only 500 kilometers from Earth, you need like 10,000 satellites to cover Earth, because you're also speeding at a very high distance. And here's the kicker, that at that distance, you do have an atmospheric drag. It's very, very little, but it's there. So that means that whatever you put there, it will deorbit in 3 to 5 years, and you have to replenish it. So it's not only that you need way more satellites, which need to be produced, you need way more launches. It's not like if Amazon would buy from Rocket Lab their whole Kuiper constellation. It's not just that they have to put it up there. There is, let's say it takes 4 years to deploy the whole constellation. Then the first satellites that they put up in year 5, they will start like deorbiting and burning up. So they need to continuously remake new satellites, replenish, relaunch. So getting one of those mega constellations, it can take out Neutron's yearly capacity for, I mean, X amount of years to come.
And they have also had the space systems business, which can feed launch contracts too. So that's also another consideration. But I think Peter Beck also said it in the same interview. He said it correctly. People don't realize that currently there are only 3 launch companies that the government trusts to launch their most sensitive hardware into space. One is ULA, one is SpaceX, and the other one is Rocket Lab. No one else is launching their sensitive hardware currently. Not even Blue Origin. Yeah, okay, Blue Origin is not launching technically, but you see a lot of space companies mentioned. But for example, the NRO, I think Peter, he was talking specifically about the NRO. That's the most sensitive agency of them all. They only trust 3 companies with their payloads. So, and if you do a bit of research and you see the amount of government funding Neutron is getting, they have a point-to-point cargo research. The Air Force is funding the second stage. They win the Victus Hayes missions. From each of these government agencies, they're getting constant funding, support, everything. And that's logical because if you know the history of Rocket Lab, one of the first, basically DARPA, which is, I think it's part of the Defense Innovation Unit. I'm not 100% sure, but it's basically what it does is it looks at innovative technology and tries to apply them for a military purpose. DARPA was the first one actually which gave Rocket Lab funding to not funding in the traditional sense, but they gave them research grants, research contracts. And by getting DARPA's stamp of approval, that allowed Peter to contact Khosla Ventures and get a significant check. So what I'm trying to say is, a lot of launch companies, they're talking about, we're going to get involved with the government, blah, blah, blah. Rocket Lab was already involved with the government from day one. It's part of their DNA, of their entire story.
Yeah. Cool. So now now we came to the part that we discussed all the news. So now we come to that the stock is at all-time lows, and we basically, everyone here, this could be renamed Rocket Lab Backholders Weekly at this point. And so it's really important what I do, and I think many of you do, is revisit, okay, is this a bad bet? Did we miss anything? Did we make a huge mistake investing into Rocket Lab, or this is the time to, sell your organs, start an OnlyFans, and, whatever you can put into the stock. And you had some very interesting tweets this week that I want to share, which actually looks at the bigger picture. One of them was this, where you talk about how old space is having a very rough time. And I just want you to, in a few words, talk about this, because I think that this is very important to take, a more distant view at this company that we all love so much.
Well, Vince, if you read my tweets, then few words is never my strength, eh? But I think just read the article yourself. It again clearly. I see a lot of, once you understand the vision, and once you see it, you see a lot of touch points. And each time I try to highlight the touch points for people. So what have Adam and Pete been saying is that by being vertically integrated, they don't run a lot of supply chain risk. And here you can see why that is important. And the funny thing about this is that this was L3 Ares, which was competing for the SDA work, which Rocket Lab is also competing for. And B, it was also about the satellite bus, basically what Rocket Lab is doing. So it was really, on point in this case. And what you can see is, supply chain risk is real for satellites, and it really, prevents you from delivering on time, executing programs on time, and by being vertically integrated, which I don't think is for every company, but for Rocket Lab it will pay off really well. And then one thing which I'm also excited about, by getting all of those parts in-house, then you can also prevent margin stacking. So then you can, if you have to buy all of the parts, like some of the old defense primes are doing, they're buying a parts with 50% markup from everyone. Then your total price, total cost of doing the space program is going to increase significantly. And I think Rocket Lab will really be able to undercut those, basically those companies on the future SDA work. And supply chain is very important. The government is, supply chain is always important, but the government, they just want to have their architecture on time, working, because they can't wait for failures.
When Iran is attacking, you need to be able to see it from space, and you don't have this excuse that, sorry, we're not ready. Like, you need to react. And I also want to just comment on this, that the old space, as you mentioned, they're like, it's a very interesting transition in the US government currently on how they buy things for the military. You actually see it also with Palantir and Anduril, or Anduril, maybe I say it wrong. But the point is that the way these contracts used to work is that they were cost plus contracts. So meaning that the government wanted something developed, and then it went to Lockheed Martin, and then basically Lockheed said, we don't know how much this is going to cost. This is a new technology. So why don't you pay the hourly pay of all of our people that is on this project, and plus 10% profit margin. And basically what happens here is that everybody is incentivized on overcharging the government, spending way more hours, and not delivering in time. And this is how all the military software, hardware, space, everything was developed that way. And the new space is Rocket Lab going to the government and saying that you want this, you give us $20 million and it will be here by June, and the risk is on us. Like, if it's not here by June, you can cancel the contract. If it costs us 30 million and we sold it to you for 20 million, it's on us. It's the investors that take the risk. And we can see, very interestingly, also in other areas like Anduril and Palantir, that this concept is really, really working, and it's making significant savings for the US government, which is very nice to see. And that the old companies have a very hard time to change their culture. An example on this is ULA, the Boeing Starliner, which was supposed to be flying before the Dragon spacecraft was able to be certified for humans. And the Boeing Starliner is still not flying with humans because they keep running into troubles, and they're like 4 years delayed. And Boeing was the one who was lobbying the government to close out SpaceX from the bidding process because they were not experienced enough, and you can't trust their quality. And it's just really, really bad performance. So Rocket Lab has a huge advantage based on over the old space guys, which is ULA, Boeing, maybe this L3 Harris that you also mentioned in I think it's this tweet, no? Yeah, exactly, it's this tweet.
Yes. So, maybe one point to add about what I also had to understand about the space industry. A lot of industries, they are optimized, mass optimized, huge companies, multinationals, production, scaled to the maximum. But in the space economy, that's totally not the case. You have a lot of, I would say, artisan shops niche companies, which, for example, provide one part of the satellite bus, and they are the experts in that. But usually their sales is not optimized, their production is not optimized, but they sell a beautiful product. So you have a lot of those shops. I think Peter Beck, he also said that a couple of times. And I think what is Rocket Lab's strategy is getting those suboptimal shops, suboptimal from an economic perspective, which have good, beautiful technology, integrating them into Rocket Lab, scaling their business, integrating all the back offices and everything, and basically fully grow those businesses from little artisan shops into full merchant component businesses. And then at the same time also giving them an advantage for the space programs projects.
Yeah. Never heard Boeing quite pronounced that way. Yeah. It's this is a European podcast today, so that's what we got.
I'm sorry, Dave.
Cool. Then there was another tweet, which is also, again, now we're looking at Rocket Lab from the 10,000 foot view, and you were basically listing out different companies, and the whole thing actually came from this chart that was shared about how much funds was raised. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but I try to quickly describe it. So it's listing competitors and how much total funds was raised in the company and how much successful launches they had. And it's really staggering. So SpaceX has had obviously 9.7 billion funding, and they had the most successful launches, which is at 339. And then Relativity had 1.3 billion raised. They're raising another 1 billion, and they have one successful launch. They had one launch, and that launch was not successful. Rocket Lab raised 1.3 billion, and they had 45 launches, and 41 of them was successful launches. And you can see the discrepancy, like a 40 times discrepancy between Relativity and Rocket Lab. And this is not just the launches. Like, keep in mind, I don't want to kill the fun from your tweet, but keep in mind that Rocket Lab from this money also acquired space systems companies. They integrated it into the company. They're developing a new rocket, and they still have 500 million in the bank. So do you want to summarize this tweet again? Because I think it's really useful for the audience that you're listing out the different competitors and what is their strength and weakness and what we can look forward to.
Which of the competitors do you want me to start?
I mean, we can take it in the order of the tweet. It's you started with you described Rocket Lab here.
Yeah, so with the 1.3 billion, I'm actually impressed with what they did with that money. Yeah, I'm not going to fully, reread the tweet. You can read it yourself, but basically the main point of that, they did a lot with that money. They're very capital efficient. So they really, out of each dollar of capital they get, they really put it to work very efficiently. Maybe even more efficiently than SpaceX. It is just that SpaceX has a lot of more of those dollars than Rocket Lab.
Yeah.
And I think for a new space company, and not talking about SpaceX, not talking about Blue Origin, capital getting a lot of out of $1 is very, very, very important because it's a very capital intensive business.
Exactly. So you're also saying here that Blue Origin, like, they don't have a business model yet, but as a company they're very solid because the founder is willing to.
I always sometimes also joke a bit about it, but the main point, theoretically New Glenn it could launch, I don't know, for 40 million, and it could cost 60 million, and they could do that for 5 years until they got the cadence up and running and lowered the cost. For example, they have a significant runway because everything can get funded until it gets to the end game. That's more my point. So they don't really are constrained in the business model compared to other new space companies. I think that having all of the money in the world also makes you lazy. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
if having if having sufficient money is very important in the rocket business, but having unlimited money is actually, I think, counterproductive, because what will happen, Peter Beck, he always talks about it as well. He says, yeah, about it, 5 engineers sit in a room and they take a decision. It could also be 50 engineers in the room taking a decision. Well, for those 5 engineers to take the decision takes a lot of less time than 50 engineers.
Yeah.
Solutions don't get solved by just adding more engineers to the problem.
Yeah.
And then particularly about relativity space, I already commented a bit about it, but launching, I understand, maybe first things first, you cannot develop a heavy launch vehicle, I think, without, so you can't apple to apple compare Neutron with Terranar. Terranar is a heavy vehicle. In order to develop a heavy vehicle costs significantly more. But that said, if you consider, Neutron costing 300 million in order to get it to the pad, and then Relativity spending, maybe not all of their valuation is for launching the rocket, but let's say if they spend 1.52 billion in order to get Terranar to the pad, where's the competitive advantage?
Yeah.
And probably, people will say, yeah, but then there will be scarcity, and there will be a lot of demand, but like Dave already said, Dave is very convinced about it, and I'm getting a bit more convinced about it too. Falcon 9 is going to, in 2026, is going to lower those launch prices. So then they bring that rocket to the market, and then all of a sudden the market already decreased in launch costs. How are they going to deal with that? They sold their entire manifest already on the discount. So for me, the most worry, I think that technically, I think the CEO, he's technically very well. I think he can. I think he will pull it off too, but that's just my sense. I think he can develop the rocket, but I'm really questioning is, how commercially, how does the business model close? That's still my question with Relativity. How's the business model going to close? And I think with Firefly, I think I can already see the business model closing. I think the main problem they have is reliability and production. So I think Elon Musk and Peter Beck, they always go on, they are always quoted, your first rocket is easy, your 20th rocket is hard. Because your first rocket is made by PhDs, and your 20th rocket is made by people on the production line with manuals. And I think Firefly currently got a bit stuck in getting to the 20th rocket and producing them reliably in that phase, in the production phase. But it wouldn't surprise me if they somehow, within a couple of years, they would be able to overcome that. And Northrop Grumman is significantly financing, I think, the MOV vehicle. So my main point overall with Firefly, I think they will hang in there. They will just, be around. Northrop will probably feed them some lunches. Probably they will also participate in NSSL, but I don't really see them as like a company which which showed me that they could, for example, really go head to head with Rocket Lab on, in terms of execution. I didn't see that yet.
Yeah.
But I think they have staying power, and that their business model closes. So that was the main takeaway, actually.
And then we have ABA Space Systems. They are only a payload manufacturer, right?
No. Yeah, I think there are two companies they named. There's ABL Space, and they have a rocket. It's called RS-1.
Okay.
And it's basically launch in a box. So that's interesting. It's an interesting concept. Basically, what they do is that they have this vision that you have to have responsive launch from everywhere. And one of their main theses is, if America is ever attacked, the first thing they're going to attack is then the spaceports, Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg. And then all of a sudden, no rockets can launch into the sky anymore. But wait, we have launch in a box. So all of the rocket, launch infrastructure, the rocket is all modular, so it fits into containers, and then they can launch from everywhere, theoretically from everywhere. I really like the concept, but I do think, you're really getting some limitations in the rocket by this design that won't make it maybe very easy for production, or won't. I think the launch in a box is a limiting in design for them, but I'm not sure if yeah. I see them as a really like a niche player. Yeah, of course they're supported by Lockheed Martin, but I think Lockheed Martin, that's actually, if Lockheed Martin supports the launch company, I know they will never get big, because Adam Spicy, he also talked about that in one of his interviews. He said, because Lockheed Martin was first an investor in Rocket Lab, and he then said, basically, Rocket Lab had these very big, ambitious plans, and Lockheed was, no, we only want you to do this one small thing for us, and you're not going to do satellites, because then you're going to compete with us. So basically, if Lockheed is invested in you, then they just want you to do the small niche, but don't get too big. So as long as Lockheed is invested, then then I'm fine. But the main point I wanted to make, I think, for them, I'm not sure if I think they will survive, because the DoD will see a lot of, interest in their solution. But I don't think they have the skill of a Firefly or a Rocket Lab or anything like that.
Yeah. And Stoke Space, I mean, they're still in development, and they are still a bet on if this technology that they have a very interesting technology that they want to fully reuse the stage 2 of their rocket, and they have to prove that this concept works. They're not even about competing yet, not at that stage.
No, but even though they are, I think, quite far from the bet, I do see promise in their business model. It makes sense. I think for me what they're doing, especially, they keep everything very low cost, similar to Rocket Lab. They have a lot of capital efficiency. The design is, of course, new, so that really needs to be proven. But if the tech works, and that in rocket industry is always a big if, then I could see them really enter the stage. Definitely.
Yeah.
But still, still a couple of years out, I think, currently. And so it will be interesting to see. I really call them a wild card. For me, they're a wild card. They can, they can really, shake the industry, but they could also go out slowly.
Yeah. All right. By the way, I'm not sure the people that we have some people from Twitter that are watching. Francisco Ramirez, He's saying, Vince, with all the shares you have, are you going to the annual meeting of stockholders in June? And no, I'm not going, unfortunately. Yeah, I answered you in the comments. I just don't know if you can see it. Tim, are you going? Maybe if the stock price would be 20, then I would consider it. But
Is it technically even? Yeah, usually I heard them. Annual meetings are not usually very exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm an auditor, so I did a lot of them. You want to go to the investor days? I think those are more exciting.
And Peter Beck said we might do one at the Neutron launch day, and that is a very I might consider that. That would be very, very interesting.
That would indeed be very interesting. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Then there is a question here. Vince is bullish. The upcoming reuse of Electron is an unexpected surprise. How can that impact the company's bottom line in the near and medium term? Do you have an answer for this? I mean, like, I quickly answer and then we see if we think the same. But I don't think that in the near term this will do anything. But once they start reusing Electron and they have a high cadence and a lot of reused electrons, then we know that the gross profit of those launches is going to be around 50%. And that is going to be fantastic for the financials. And we're going to see that happening. It's not like they're going to come to a quarterly earnings call and say, by the way, surprise, all the electrons that we launched was reused. So we're going to be really well aware when this is happening, and I think it's 1 to 2 years out, and that's very optimistic.
Yeah, I should also think so. You know, for Electron, the bill of materials is 1/3 of the price, and probably I think Spice mentioned of that 1/3, 60% is then recoverable. So those will be the, that will be the saving that you will realize. But I think Rocket Lab, not a lot of people like that, but I fully understood why they postponed Electron's first stage reusability, because which competition does Electron currently have? Of course, they will get competition in food, but currently there's almost no competition in the market. And if they then have to choose stretch their limited resources between Neutron and Electron, for a customer, from the customer side, it doesn't matter if the vehicle is reusable or not. And Rocket Lab, I think they made a clever bet in this case by, switching all gears to Neutron. And then, first stage reusability will be indefinitely in time before the first competitive vehicle hits the market. They'll make it work before that. Definitely.
Yeah. Cool. So we covered a large topics today. So what we discussed from Rocket Lab as a company is that they're insanely efficient with the money invested in them, like maybe even as efficient or maybe even more efficient as SpaceX, but SpaceX has more money to invest and be efficient on. Then we learned that there is, like, the old space that is a competition to them. They don't have the culture to really compete and they will get out competed. And in the new space, we went over different competitors, and the business models need to be still played out. The competition is many, many years away. By that time, Rocket Lab has built up a very considerable moat. So from the competition standpoint, we are doing good. Regarding the stock and price, do you think that the company is, so if we would delete the stock price from your mind and you would just have the news about the company and the reports, would you be happy as an investor to hold that company, or do you think that there needs to be changes and this is potentially a bad investment?
Oh, that's a question to me?
Yeah.
It's just
yeah. You understand the question that like you bought Rocket Lab, right? And then because you were planning to hold for 10, 15 years, like you could forget about the stock price, right? Like if you would just get the report of like, this is the revenue that the company did, this is the contracts that we signed, this is the research that we're working on. Would you be happy as an investor not knowing where the stock is?
Yeah, definitely. Otherwise, I wouldn't be invested, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I, what I am continuously looking for is, are they executing? Is the business improving? Are they working towards the vision? And I really like the company's vision, in that sense, being an end-to-end space company, because I think we won't realize it today because currently we're very much in the space infrastructure boom. So everyone is building the hardware,
Yeah.
but once the hardware is fully optimized, someone is going to really use that hardware. And we've
Yeah.
seen the same, I think, with AI. AI couldn't exist if the internet was not there, if cloud computing, for example, was not there. Certain technologies had to be there before it could be realized. I feel like the space infrastructure is also, space industry is also AI, but then 10 years, 10 years earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm very excited for them. If you own the space infrastructure stack from a launch vehicle to satellite to application, then you can provide any service. And that's what Peter Beck always says. And that's 100% true. Any service more competitive than any of your competitors.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it's just economics 101. If you don't have to, for example, a company would only owns application has to pay a launch vehicle, has to pay a satellite. Each time there's a different company in between them, there's a 50% margin increase every time because everyone needs to make money. So everyone is charging 50%, 50%, 50%. If you get to the end customer, you get a very different price than the Rocket Lab would get. And I think that would be potentially within, let's say, the 10, 15 years timeframe, that could really be disruptive for some services because Starlink and SpaceX proved that if you make the cost of something low enough, then adoption will come.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And as last question for this show, so what do you think can move the stock lower? Like what catalyst can come that would make the stock go lower? And it can be both micro and macro. And what catalyst do you think would move the stock higher from where we are?
To point out the obvious, of course, an Archimedes engine delay, a significant one.
I have a question. I think that is priced in at this point in the stock. It had like the amount that we have fallen. There was also someone, I don't know if they're watching now, when I tweeted out that we're going live on Rocket Lab Weekly, he had a very good question because he wanted to have our thoughts on how much is Neutron needed for Rocket Lab to be profitable, and can they even be profitable without Neutron? And just to answer that question, like I think that the reason why Neutron is so needed for profitability is we know that they have to spend 300 million on Neutron, right? Like that spending has to be done. And I think that Spice and Beck has also mentioned that without Neutron, they would be at least adjusted EBITDA profitable at the current state. And I think that if Neutron fails or gets significantly delayed, it doesn't necessarily, like for sure it adds cost, but not as much as you think, because the real costs are in the initial build out of the pad, the infrastructure, the building of the factory, and yeah, like if something blows up, then yeah, maybe you have an extra $10 million of material cost, but you don't have to rebuild the pad. Okay, depends on how you blow up, but hopefully you don't have to rebuild the pad.
Yeah, I really get your point, Vince, but the question is not do you and me get it? The question is the market,
Yeah,
because it's a
yeah,
you
you're
can be
right.
right, but like I think you said it also before. You can still be right, but still be proven wrong by the market,
Yeah,
even though
yeah,
you're right. But the point. So the question I think really is, when is the market going to recognize that? I think the yeah, I think the market will, space investments still have a bad name. It wouldn't really surprise me if it takes almost up until, a real successful Archimedes hot fire to really get the stock going. And, Neutron, like you said, without Neutron, the company is profitable. So even if Neutron would fail, but I think Neutron is a very important part of their, vertical integration strategy. So it definitely needs to work. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, I am. The thing is, I'm not too worried. I think it will happen. Uh, I'm very confident it will happen in 2025. I'm not. I'm not so super confident that it will happen in 2024. But the thing where I really start to get worried if somehow it turns out in 2026. Yeah, then I would really start to get worried. But other than that, I not so much. Especially if you just take the long term view. Yeah, I've not received an indication from anything I read, and I read a lot and I listen a lot, and you know, and especially also if you read Ashley Vance's book, what can you, what do you want more out of a CEO? The guy started building rockets in his, garden when he was 10.
yeah, 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 yeah.
His experience in material sciences because he was a material engineer. His experience with production lines, building rockets for his entire life, already built a successful Electron rocket, scaled the production line. You know, what is the real risk? Uh, I can't wrap my head around, why Neutron all of a sudden would be, this big fat delay. I don't buy it. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm will be proven wrong. But yeah, I've literally no indication from anything to doubt about Peter Beck's credentials. Sure, he won't get it there probably, I think, in 2024, because people have to forget why is he saying that? Because he of course wants to onboard on the National Security Space Launch Program. But people have to separate, the marketing and the noise from the facts.
Yeah, and he's technically not lying because he said like, look, it's a rocket program, and as long as there is a path, he doesn't wave the white flag, right? Because like it has to, as you said, like he's trying to get a big contract. And I think that the funny thing is that even this contract would be very understanding if there is a delay, right? Like a reasonable delay. Like let's say that you had a reasonable path to fly in December, but it ended up being April the next year. I think they would be 100% okay with it at the NSSL.
Yeah, I think at the Space Force they already think, of course, that Neutron end of December. I don't think they are very confident in that's going to happen. But I think my read is that the National Security Space Launch, so the Space Force, they just want to onboard Rocket Lab in the program to get some competition going.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I think my if I had to, if you put a gun to my head and say, give me the launch date, I would say somewhere between April 2025 and summer 2025. I think
Yeah,
that would
I
be a realistic launch date for me.
yeah, I would agree with you if you also put a gun
And
to my
if
head.
if they put that off, that's an amazing achievement by any
Yeah,
standard.
yeah. Also on how much money it took them, also the time that it took them. So yeah,
But maybe for the stock price, for people watching the stock price closely, if it's going to be between April and May, recognize that for Wall Street, for example, Wall Street is now framing December 2024. Each time they're probably going to hear a delay, a delay, a delay, a delay. It could technically be that the entire stock price will be really suppressed for a large part of 2024. But for me, yeah, like I said, I of course pay some attention to the stock price, but I'm more confident in the long-term vision of the company.
All right. Well, that's a nice way to end for today. Thank you so much. This was a really long, big episode. So I hope it was giving value to the audience. And if anybody wants to follow Twim, I highly recommend it. His Twitter that's his name, actually, if you look at it, and is also in the description box below. And thank you so much for joining back holders of Rocket Lab Weekly. And see you next week, which hopefully will be a greener week than the last one was. Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone.